Today, we're going to go on a quest. I'm a nerd at heart, and I love slaying dragons in fantasy worlds, but now we can do it in reality. To do so, I'm going to claim a couple things. In fact, I'm going to make a bold claim for someone with a liberal arts degree and not a degree in business or finance. Economics are always about two things. Economics are always about humans, and economics are always about power. I argue that physical money, from a high-level view, has very little to do with it. So let's dig into the text and see if anything I says makes sense. I'm a liberal arts major, so that could really go either way. Pharaoh, to me, sounds like he has dragon sickness. Now, for those of you not stuck in Dungeons and Dragon world, dragon sickness is pretty simple. In fantasy things, many dragons breathe fire, they terrorize villagers, they occasionally take maidens, a flock of sheep. But the real terror is that they hoard gold. They crave it. They raise villages and plunder harvests in a coins that is not theirs to plunder. They have a compulsion to hoard and destroy the people around them. Power, especially at that level, doesn't give up and will almost always perpetuate itself. Pharaoh had this power. Losing this workforce of the enslaved Hebrews would devastate this economy about people that Pharaoh's dragon sickness craves more than anything in the world. He craves the power of having this unpaid workforce he can brutalize, even if it hurts the Egyptians via plagues and all the other signs that come a little later in the text. Now, it may seem counterintuitive that earlier in the text, Pharaoh orders the genocide of the males of his unpaid workforce, but it is intuitive when you think about it in terms of power and not pure numbers. He wants a workforce he can control. He is terrified of the workforce uprising. He is terrified of the Hebrews outnumbering his people, so he wants them gone. In Exodus, he attempts to control the workforce by genocide. Current regimes also use deportations or prison labor to keep the workforce in check, but genocide is always around the corner. Our threat our history knows all too well, our recent history. So let's look at the text today. Now, often we read the text and try to put ourselves in the shoes of the protagonist. It's only natural. But I would venture to say that many of us here are not the Hebrews, but the Egyptians. We are benefiting from a system that exploits, but even when we are kind-hearted and well-meaning, we don't always really know how to fix it on a justice or systemic level. That is what I bash my head against every night. Why are the people hungry? What can we do to stop the hunger in the first place? Even if we are benefiting from this system, how can we slay the dragons that would smite us for speaking up? Now, for the Hebrews among us, I don't need to remind you that anyone living in poverty is going through it. Poverty and lack of resources grinds you down and wears you to the bone. It keeps you cold when you live outside and stressed when you see your kids and wonder how you're going to feed them. There is a literal scarcity of food, water, clothing, shelter. And some of us Egyptians look upon those in that condition and hold on to what we have, lest we become like them. It's understandable when you think resources are scarce, but it does hurt our Hebrew neighbors. The story in the text mirrors our own lives. We all have an economic story because economics are about people. They are deeply personal. Every time I smell heavy diesel fumes, I think about economics. It reminds me of my time in urban Cali, Colombia, when I was a missionary kid. 3-year-old Katy was horrified to learn that the boy on the side of the dusty road couldn't eat the candy he was selling. See, I had run home to my mom and said, "This little boy has all this candy. Mom, why can't I have it? Why can't I eat candy all day?" She told me that he had to sell it to food put on the table, and 3-year-old Katy was devastated that she could have candy and toys, but that this little boy couldn't. That's the start of my economic story. Because some 30-odd years later, I still feel guilt when I go to buy things. I freeze when I see the Hebrews who don't have enough. How could I possibly fix that? Instead of doing something, I freeze up and go to my own little dragon hoard in my house. Because we internalize economics, because economics are about people and their daily material living conditions. We internalize scarcity because economics are about power. And those that hold the power want us to think that there is true scarcity. The people in power want us to think that there's not enough to go around for everyone, because that scarcity mindset is what keeps them in power. Dragon sickness hardens their hearts. It is little wonder that we have a handful of dragons at the top of the system right now. It's easy to blame immigrants for taking our resources when you feel in your heart, based on that internalized story, that there aren't enough resources to go around. This comes from a scarcity mindset. Those with dragon sickness are the ones burning down the village every time they open their mouth or do their Nazi salutes or run for office. The hoarders are not the immigrants who are here to live their lives and break out of their own literal scarcity. A scarcity thrust upon them by the U.S.'s dragon sickness that resulted in exploitation of natural resources, human labor, and land for generations. As Pharaoh had his minions exploit and murder dissent, the fields and towns of Central and South America are filled with the blood of those trying to unionize against big corporations doing their dirty work where we can't see it. Those corporations are led by dragons that sent mercenaries to the sugarcane fields to murder unionizers, or the CIA suppressing elected governments to try to help their people. So on that dark note, you might be asking yourself, well, okay, Katy, you just laid out a problem, and you took a while doing it. Y'all are probably very aware of dragon sickness and hardening hearts, even if you call it by a different name. So what? We are in a mess of a timeline with little to no visible light at the end of the tunnel. There are too many similarities to other awful times that involved human beings being forced into cages. Where is the hope? What can we as individuals do about it? Well, I actually do have some good news, but I also have some bad news. But first, the bad news so I can get it over with. The bad news is that most of us aren't Moses. Most of us aren't Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King. Most of us can't do much by ourselves, especially not in the face of a handful of fire-breathing dragons. One person can't turn the tide, not by themselves. None of us are going to roll a nat 20 in our game and turn the tide and give the dragon the final blow by themselves. So what are we going to do? Where the hell is the good news? These are dragons. We can't slay them. Not with that attitude, we can't. You can feel helpless and turn to denialism, or you can let that truth liberate you to focus on what you can do. Taking off the heavy cape of being a superhero gives you more strength to do reasonable things, leading to less burnout and more lasting change. So I'm going to reach to my Southern Baptist roots, and I'm going to give you 4 steps instead of 3. 4 steps to overthrow the powers that be and turn society into something beautiful, equitable, fair, and dragon-proof. So you know what's great? Like I told you, I had good news. UBC's doing pretty good at step 1. We're further ahead than you think. Step 1 is to survive this wave as community. Dragons use ocean waves over and over and over. Right now, we're in a tsunami. No community or church is perfect, but we're doing all right. We're providing mutual aid to the hungry and to those doing the work to change systems. Feeding our neighbors, no matter who they are, helps us survive the tsunami wave of dragons that's trying to drain hope. Draining hope, in fact, is the #1 tactic of dragons, not breathing fire. They want us to be drained of all our hope. We bring hope every week by delicious food from Fadi and his community of cooks and volunteers. We drain hope when Arnold goes and works with our Micah 6 youth. Or we build hope. Draining hope is combated by taking care of each other. So second, together as a community, we turn to our holy texts. We're pretty used to turning holy texts. But we use our divine imaginations to give us a societal goal. The kingdom of God is the trendy term right now. Throughout the Bible and throughout history, God has shown us ways she has told us a fair society would look like. We can truly use our imaginations, or at least the imagination of Jesus, in all his parables and miracles. Like the parable of the day laborers, the ones who weren't able to be there the whole time but still got a full wage. The parable of the feeding of multitudes of hungry people in the Roman Empire. We as a collective can afford to pay our day laborers even if they can't make a full day's work. Genesis shows us the abundance of God's creation, so abundant that it exhausted God for a day. The prophets actually give us a pretty concrete system of Jubilee, where every 7 years debts are reset and the land is divided evenly again. It's as if God in her infinite wisdom knows we struggle to keep a system up and need concrete reset every 7 years. I could use a concrete reset every year, to be honest. In concrete terms, we listen and look for alternatives to the current system. The trendy term or thing right now is to hate capitalism and blame capitalism for everything, for some of us. And I can see why. But I also see why the words socialism or communism conjure up countries that didn't implement it well and ended up murdering millions of people. But maybe we should look at our own system and the violence it brings to start reimagining something different and new, something dragon-proof where they can't roam. There's lots of people doing lots of imagining, and it's a good thing to explore things outside of our comfort zone. And speaking of our comfort zone, the third step goes hand in hand with the second. We work together on our own financial narratives. The rich man walked away dejected because he knew that selling his things to the poor and leaving his lifestyle would be impossible for him. He had an internal narrative of looking at the poverty around him and thinking, if I give up anything, I'm going to be like them. Had he instead turned to community and shared, even a little bit at a time while he unpacked his economic story, things would turn differently. Getting our internal narratives directed properly helps us go on to the next step, because we can use this to unpack our economic stories together. We unpack the trauma of our economic stories and internalize a theology and posture of abundance, not the economics of scarcity or power or guilt. This isn't going to be easy. But like I said, we've already done step one. We're doing good, guys. So fourth and the final step is implementation. We've found our target goals and we've got our sights attuned. We're working to create an environment that dragons cannot burn. And that is what preps us for lasting change. As we are doing the work of rewriting our economic story together, we continue to care for each other. The church has some really good mechanisms for community care. Sitting in a deacons meeting is incredible. Our deacons and lay people work tirelessly to take care of our deacon families. When we don't see people, we check in on them, not because we demand they come to church as some moral imperative, but because we love them and want them to know that there is a community that loves them as well. Not all of us can be arrested protesting for concrete policy change, but we can provide comfort and shelter to those who can. Come on a Wednesday night and you'll see that. The overwhelm of all the dragons gives us many distractions. We can turn away from those distractions by looking to our community for concrete actions. I'm overwhelmed by the prospect of mass deportations. Instead of sitting in my dragon horde, I went to an immigrant training on how to help each other. I don't have it down by any means, but I feel a little more empowered. And while not everything's about my feelings, those stories make a lasting difference. Are you overwhelmed by the digital tech bros? I'm working with a local organization to provide some guides to bring us a healthier relationship with privacy, security, and technology. If you stick with the communities, we can keep giving you concrete steps like targeted boycotts and letter writing. I am so grateful for UBC because I see my friends who are floundering. I see my friends who look at all these dragons and cannot fathom what they can do because the reality is they can't do anything by themselves. Stick with this community. Whatever community that is, you don't have to be at UBC, you don't have to be a person of faith, but standing together is what the difference is going to be from last time to this time. Instead of seeing the system as it is and seeing the horrors of feeling helpless, turn to each other, the people that we wish the peace of Christ on. Community combats helplessness. In some ways, I feel more prepared this go around because I have community relationships. I'm going to church again. We're forming community relationships each week by the people downstairs and with each other. And long term, let's listen. Let's shake our fear of change. Let's shake our fear of change of economic systems and unpack the buzzwords that scare us. Abolition, communism, socialism. And I'm not saying socialism or communism is the answer. We have seen how it goes wrong. But I'm willing to give it a look after I've seen how capitalism's been going. So to close up, many of us know how the rest of the story goes, and the ending's actually pretty good. Aaron and Moses ask again and again and again for their people to be let go. We hear songs about it. It is only once Pharaoh is at risk of losing his power that he lets him go. Then Pharaoh's dragon sickness chases the Hebrews across the Red Sea when he changes his mind. But God stopped him. She said, "No, you shall not pass." It can be impossible to see the crossing of the Red Sea from here, the time of finally slaying the dragon. But y'all, together, we can slay dragons too. God didn't give us these texts for light reading, but for the hope of things that can happen and divine imagination and concrete actions. Thanks be to God.